It's still morning. Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity, AUM. Thank you, Finn, for this introduction and opportunity to communicate with you as well. Dr. Cobb, English, and Dr. Stallings, correct? I'm trying to get the names right. All right, so please forgive me. But thank you all, and the students as well that are here. So I have two disclaimers before I get started, okay? The first one is, when I take my glasses off, I can't see. When I put them on, I can't see. So please, forgive me. It's time for me to go get the prescription, fixed. And the second one is, I do not specialize in the histories of redlining. I am a citizen of the community who is responding to it with my art. So, let me make sure everything's good to go. But before I could really talk about disparities, I hope you all can hear me as well, because I am soft-spoken. Before I can talk about disparities, I can't talk about it without talking about my previous work, Redline. This helps gives and contextualize the work of disparities, which was birthed from that. And it also speaks of my artistic practice, my research as a photographer. So within my art, a lot of things influence my work, and poetry is one of them. I'm going to say several things, but poetry is one of them. Langston Hughes wrote a poem called Mother to Son. And there's a line in that poem that says, "Life ain't been no crystal stair." In this dialogue, this mother talks to her son using figurative language, highlighting the aesthetics of struggle, such as life is full of tacks, splinters, and life has a place no carpet is on the floor. So there's no comfort. Langston Hughes is responding to how blacks were treated at this time, how the system was intentionally placed to keep blacks from climbing the social ladder. So this picture here I use a lot within my presentations. So I have a story to tell you. This is when I was 4 or 5 years old. From the Powell family photo album, I found this photo to be very significant in my art making, and I often use it in my presentations. As early as I can remember, my family lived in public housing. My grandmother lived in public housing, my aunts and uncles, because that was all I knew at this time. But this photo here was one of the last images taken in our 2-bedroom apartment on the west side of Birmingham. In the photograph, you'll see boxes in every room. I can remember this as if it was Christmas, because the next day we were moving into our first home. The excitement on my face in the photograph, and don't read it too deep, because my brother's head is cut off. Don't read into that. That's just a lack of expertise from my father in the camera. But my excitement was like Christmas, because I was getting a home. I was going to get my own room for myself, to myself. And I was going to paint it pink, It was pink, like Pepto-Bismol pink. But yeah, why did we do that? I don't know. But anyway, to satisfy the 5-year-old, right? But we were moving into a community called Central Park. And in Central Park, this home, which is on the right side, that is the home we purchased. My parents purchased, right? And in this neighborhood, on the yard in front of my house, we had a street. And the street was called 55th Street, Inslee. And in this street divided the neighborhood, my house from my neighbor's house. And that street, 55th Street, was a symbol for me that showed racism within my community. So why did the street show racism? Because on the other side of the street was an elderly, racist white man who would fuss at us if we would cross the street. If our ball or toys got into his yard, he would grab them and give them to his dog to chew on. So at this age, I never really understood the complexities of this issue. But 55th Street, like I said, was no longer a part of my address. It became a visual symbol of fear, division, due to the color of my skin. As I began to do research on redlining, this picture was my reference. It was the moment between public housing and home ownership. According to the Federal Housing Authority, redlining is a practice of refusing to bag a mortgage in neighborhoods based on racial and ethnical composition. Or on the other hand, in some cases, provide ridiculous rates, causing many to be forced or to lose their homes. And to be honest, my parents avoided foreclosure twice when purchasing this home. I'm not sure how much their rate was at the time, and I'm not sure how much the house cost, but they were able to keep the house at its longevity. As many blacks began to move into the white neighborhoods, such as Central Park at that time, whites began to migrate elsewhere, which is known as white flight. So as I continued to go through this process and think about redlining, I never knew about it until I started to question the location of my family and why we all lived in a certain part of the neighborhood in Birmingham. So I started to reach out and do some research with some books. And the first book that I looked at was The Color of Law. The Color of Law by Richard Ralston, and he speaks of the histories within redlining and how our government reacted. Also, The Most Segregated City in America by Charles Connolly. He's pretty much an outsider coming into Birmingham trying to analyze the city itself. And then I also looked at Spaces and Places by Phi Wan Tuan. I think I pronounced that right. I mess it up every time. And within his books, it allows to how place shapes our identity and from our consciousness as well. So the Homeowner Loan Coalition, HOLC, had maps across the United States. And a lot of the major cities had these maps with different colors, schemes, such as this one, Minneapolis and Pennsylvania. So I started to search and see if I could find one for Birmingham. And of this nature, I could not. But however, I was able to find this postal map, which still holds the aesthetics of the other maps as well. So what about this postal map was so intriguing to me? What the key is right on the right-hand side, here, it's similar to the other maps. So it was saying green, considered the good areas in Birmingham, okay? Blue, still desirable. It has reached its peak. Yellow, the neighborhood is starting to decline. In red, labeled as hazardous. But if I go back to those other maps, on this maps it ends with red and it also talks about industrial work. But the Birmingham map, right there in the black, it says Negro concentration. And this was very stunning to me to see these words, not only printed, but handwritten. So as an artist, I thought about this. And I wanted to pull those elements, and I created this piece, The Color Key. So I approached redlining in two different ways. Through the documentary of the residue through the lens of photography, and secondly, rethinking the power of maps through appropriation and countermapping. I began to think about line in the urban freeways as well, how they cross America and divided neighborhoods and suppressing Black progress. The interstates across America, like Los Angeles, Seattle, Baltimore, Chicago, and others, was routed straight through low-income and minority neighborhoods, creating new spaces and dividing people from social and economic opportunities. Interstate 2059 in Birmingham is a prime example of this phenomenon. These pictures here are actually just before they tore it down and remodeled. The path of the highway was built by Bull Corner type people, attorney Bart Swanson says in the Channel 13 News interview. Bull Corner was a commissioner of Alabama's public safety and strongly oppressed integration. He was known to have ties to the KKK. The construction of the highways eliminated exits to predominantly white neighborhood, disallowing Blacks to integrate. So these interstates were built intentionally to keep you out. With this in mind as well, I find the work of photographer and sculptor Richard Long, 1967, Line Made by Walking, to be interesting for me conceptually. I was drawn to his idea of line making. This piece was made on Long's journey to St. Martin's from his home to Bristol's. He walked back and forth until the grass was flat, transforming it into a visual line. Although Long's presence is not there, he leaves an indexical trace alluding to time, motion, and reality. Despite the fact Long's path was temporal, this creates a dialogue in questioning the unpredictable nature of divided space and how it plays a role in our society. It also questions who has the power to draw the line and dictates where it starts and where it ends. The marginalizing of the city of Birmingham geographically left many people in areas of poverty and hopelessness. As I continued to explore with my camera in hand, I found myself in a documentary photography mode, wanting to capture the suburbs in its current state. The city's economic advancements was pretty much growing at this time, but however, in these communities, people were losing their homes or even getting evicted from their homes. Spaces and Places by Yi Fong Tuan argues, another place can lack reality because we know it only from the outside through the eyes of a tourist. As an artist researcher, revealing the truth was my goal, my truth. I was no tourist. I lived in these communities. In some cases I could identify, and in some cases I could not. I wasn't an outsider. So I started to search a way to illustrate the state of the urban communities. So I found myself documenting, similar that to William Christenberry. Arthur Ralston argues that documentary photographers all have common characteristics. They are curious, yet objective. They search with inquisitive zeal for the essence of nature and events. They examine, they scrutinize to reveal the truth. As my research and investigation continued to fuel, I looked at these complexities and I was drawn at the work of William Christenberry. His straightforwardness of photography. But however, William Christenberry was not the photographer that really spoke to the subjective matter in which I wanted to address. So I looked towards the photographer LaTonya Ruby Frazier and her efforts to document the effects of economic and environmental decline in her hometown in Braddock, Pennsylvania. Her work makes visible and limited practices. Excuse me. Her work visibly places between abandonment, environmental, and social effects surviving after industry collapse in Braddock, placing the viewer in this position that they're no longer considered themselves as a tourist, but now a resident of the community. And here we're in the community of Inslee, and these are probably not the exact ones, but they're similar in aesthetic to Negro quarters from the Sloss, for Sloss workers. As we go back to this map once again, appropriating the map was my second point. Photography and maps are very similar. Both are intentional devices to visually describe a place. Both are drawings, one with light and the other with pigment. I've always been fascinated with maps through its element of design, typography, color theory, data, and its notion of space and scale. Maps represent us individually and define our personal relationships to the world. Many artists are influenced by the appropriation of maps and abstractionists in an abstract way. And here we have artist Bryce Hudson. Just thinking about, once again, 55th Street, the line, I was able to connect with his geometric canvas. And the title of this, There Goes the Neighborhood. And it is a simple depiction of how a black family comes into a white neighborhood. He uses the simple geometric language with a limited color palette to enhance his compositional form. So, I found myself robbing the authority of the map, stripping it from its original purpose, unmasking it, and conforming it to my own conceptual logic. So here, if you see, I hope it's a little blurry, but it's called North Birmingham. So what I want to do is go into these maps and actually outline the communities from the maps and pulling them into placing them into the skies. Now, these communities are the same communities where I went in to photograph the dilapidated homes. These shapes visually show the power of line, containment, and referencing of redlining. I see these shapes not only as walls or borders, but even birthmarks or labels systematically imposed upon a community. Once again, I quote Attorney Slauson, where a child grows up should not dictate where he ends up. And I remember as a child, my mom would always say, the sky is the limit, and in the sky, there are no borders. So the redlining exhibition was not just to show or to create work. I wanted to make sure the work was a part of the community as well. So I had the opportunity to speak and show the work at a forum with public planning urban designers for the city. So we were able to talk with students about what to consider and make sure you include the voice of the community when you plan to redevelop an area in the city. So it was very refreshing to talk with them and to hear, allow them to hear our considerations. The work also traveled to the National Public Housing Museum, and the sky maps in the key was shown next to, excuse me, some rare footage of Dr. Martin Luther King. Here, the work was able to be displayed in New Southern Photography. And this show pretty much showed images of, well, photographers that are working in a more contemporary way than those of our practitioners. The work was also published in a book, or the catalog. And then also we were able to have a panel discussion about the photography as well. So I was on the panel with Romeo Ross, who is a well-known photographer and also film nominated artist. Jared Suarez, myself, and Kasuma Harris, all Southern photographers in this area. With that being said, the work caught some attention, and the work was shown at the Birmingham Museum of Art. And now currently I could say that each piece is a part of their collection. We also had a panel discussion with the community, allowing myself, Odessa Woodford, who was the founding member of the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute as well, and T. Marie King, who is a local activist in Birmingham. So alongside the exhibition and the images, I wanted to make sure that the community voice was heard, and not only looking at the bad side of the community, we wanted to know what the good side of the community, what makes a good neighborhood. What are you excited about your neighborhood? And a lot of people were able to post. The first one at the top is where it started, and then the second one is actually not the last image, because we received much more sticky notes as it continued to go forth. And I'm going to try to read this. Redlining has given a name to the stories I heard as a child, and the stories that were told to my mom and my grandmother of how the highways came through and destroyed the beautiful neighborhood called Groveland. And I've never heard of Groveland until I saw this sticky note. It's where they live, and it causes them to move, to be amongst the first black families to integrate Woodlawn. And that's another community in Birmingham area. Also, beyond the sticky notes, the community was able to produce audio sayings and asking questions. What do you love about your neighborhood? What you want to improve about your neighborhood? As we continue to move forward with the redlining, there were also disposable cameras given to children in the community center. So not only that, within the museum, we moved outside of the museum and placed these cameras in their hands. Now, before I started in academia, I taught visual arts in the school system for 3 to 4 years. And I brought my art class to the museum during this time. And most of these children did not know that the museum was free for them to go and to be a part of, because the stigmatism upon the museum where blacks could not actually go into the museum. And then they only have certain days where blacks could go at that time. So the children were very excited to be in the museum, and they was very excited to see someone they know that has art on the wall. Also, within other communities such as Smithfield area, students were able to do sunprints of their own communities. So like I said, we're not just talking about the bad parts of the neighborhoods or what has happened within the communities. We're actually allowing them to talk about the things that are good, and allowing them also to be proud of where they come from. And this is another picture on the right-hand side with watercolors. with an outline of woodland community. And then here, I place this image in here because I have a non-English speaking student in my class, and he couldn't identify with the areas of redlining, so he wanted to outline his own Honduras, his own native land. So with that being said, let's talk about disparities. Working across several mediums in photography, disparities expands its historical, deep-rooted inequalities found in marginalized communities and landscapes. The work is meant to ask some difficult questions. How can the wealthy society in the world deny or neglect communities from progress? So here we have a photograph. Well, this is actually a video of Walmart. Sorry about that. Yes, of Walmart. So I was out there photographing Walmart because in the city of Fairfield, there are 2 Walmarts within maybe 20 yards of each other that are abandoned. And that area is considered a food desert. So as I was sitting there photographing, I start to see life happening in these dead places. So I started to record them. Many of the cars would come through really fast to avoid the light. So this space now becomes, it was a little delayed, but yeah, so now these spaces that are dead become life. Not only that, they also become spaces where if you have a teen who wants to learn how to drive, they can go out there and drive as well. So this is the first Walmart that's out there. And then this is the second Walmart, which is pretty new, but it's closed. One thing I am excited about with Birmingham is our mayor, who has really, really tried to push to eradicate these food inequalities within our city. This building here is Winn-Dixie, and I remember as a child actually going into here and shopping with my mom. That's the first time, now this is gonna sound funny, the first time I have a shopping cart full of groceries over $100. So now you get a little hand basket and you're spending $100. But yeah, but now the Winn-Dixie that was closed for many years is now open, and it's now a food giant for the community of 5 Points West. So what happens when there's no grocery stores? People lean toward convenience stores, and the people who own the convenience stores capitalize. I talked to one of the community members in the neighborhood, and she said they have expired meat at high prices. Not only that, we think about the aesthetics of the community when there's lack of transportation and how people get groceries to their home. So we start to see baskets everywhere around the community. And then I thought I'd take this picture to let them know that they need to return the carts as well. With the lack of healthy foods, we find places like this. Places that only serves fried foods. That's not healthy. That controls, and you start to think about health issues and the health disparities within communities as well. But this place, I believe it was originally a church's chicken, and it has evolved into several different things. So once again, with my photography, I am looking at the aesthetics of the community. What shows that these areas are in despair? These dilapidated buildings, these vessels, these capsules that hold memory, holds opportunity for people to gather as well, are no longer accessible for people. However, in many communities, there are community gardens. Some are functionable, some are not. But it's very, very scary. And especially if we're not educating the people on how to actually cook these vegetables or how to actually plant or harvest them within the community. Another thing to be aware of is the environmental injustices within the area. So I took this photograph standing next to a home next to their mailbox. So I call this the unwanted neighbor. So if you think about it, the soot that comes from this factory, the playground view, this is part of their property as well. So I'm actually standing on top of playground equipment taking this picture. All right, there we go again with this map, all right? I told you I loved it. So once again, this color key, I come back to revisit it and wondering how I could continue to manipulate it and use these elements as symbolic pieces within my work. So I started to look at, I hope you can see, it's very dark, painters. So this one right here, I'm really, really intrigued of. But Abers Works, who is known for his iconic colors, squares, paintings, and contribution to color theory. I'm intrigued with the laying and the opacity of color, alluding to how light intensity similar to toxic maps, which is shown highly toxic areas. So I began to play with this. And I started to create these wood panels, which is similar to minimalism, but I wanted to make sure, well, beyond minimalism, I wanted to make sure there was some kind of social narrative that went along with these as well. Unfortunately, these are not in the show. They have been acquired for personal collection in the Paul R. Jones Museum in Tuscaloosa. Hunger to explore more formal qualities. Like I said, I'm just trying to shift these ideas, and I consider these studies within my work. I look at the formal qualities of Donald Judd, who strongly disavows his association with minimalism. His entitled work is still but unclassified as a painting or a portrait, but there is an experimental nature of his work. And with my photographs here, I'm not sure sometimes how to label this. Is it photography or sculpture or photography as sculpture? So it consists of 5 photographs and a wood beam at the top. And it's entitled Dreams of the Chris. Art making is not just a personal journey. So when creating art, consider some of the contemporary problems in our society. Consider how you make your art and use it as a catalyst to bring about awareness and social change. There is a gap between these two projects, and my goal is to fill that gap, to bring redlining and disparities together. Thank you, and I'll have any questions at this time.